Hello and welcome to TMI Live number 41. Happy Bloomsday. This is about McLuhan and Joyce. I'm glad you're here. You could join me. Just at the outset, to not neglect what this is about, I'm here in the library of Eric McLuhan, where every Tuesday night I spend a couple of hours working on making a complete inventory of his library, which is around 6,000 volumes. And I'm inventorying and having a look through and documenting and sharing with you. And I'm going to talk about McLuhan and Joyce, but first I'm just going to mention this little item that I just added to the list. It's the Canadian Journal of Communication, Volume 9, Number 1, December 1982. And it's notable for a couple of reasons. For one, it's published out of Saskatoon, St. Thomas More College, which is where Eric McLuhan in 2016 gave a special lecture on his book, The Sensus Communis, Synesthesia and the Soul, in Odyssey, odd essay, as he liked to say, because it is quite odd. And that's also here, there on the McLuhan Institute YouTube channel, a recording of that lecture, which I would encourage you to have a look if you're interested. A very complex work. It took me actually a few times going through the book, and then it wasn't until actually after that lecture that I started to get a bit of an idea of what the heck he was talking about with that, because it's very deep. Hi everybody, thanks for being here. No static, thank you, my friend Sayrain, SAW, in the house. So this is notable because it's from St. Thomas More College. Also, the first article in it, and the reason why it's here, is McLuhan and Fuller, the Romantic versus the Puritan. It's a 30-page article, which I read a couple pages of it, and it looks very good. I wish I had all the time in the world and I could just read it for you here, but I can't. I'm hoping to add a section to the McLuhaninstitute.com for things like this, but more particularly writings of Marshall and Eric that aren't widely available, so you can go there and read them, because I can only ever read you bits and pieces in our short time here today. The other reason it's noticeable is, and this made me laugh, below that first item is Radio Communicator, an analysis of demographic and professional attributes by George Pollard. Dr. George Pollard, who may be watching, a friend of mine, has had me up to guest lecture in his class, his Media and Truth seminar at Carleton University in Ottawa for the last 2 years, and it's been great fun each time. I'm grateful to him for his ongoing encouragement and support, so it was kind of funny to see his name here. If you don't have this, George, I'll send you a copy. But the reason we are here today is it's June 16th. June 16th, an auspicious date for James Joyce and his book Ulysses. Ulysses takes place all on one day, and that is June 16th. This is my copy. I had a little spin through to find if there was anything specific that Marshall wrote on Ulysses, to try and talk about that tonight. And it's, look, the subject of Joyce and McLuhan is a huge subject. As Sarah Sharma and John Shoesmith titled their conference a couple of years ago, Many McLuhans, you could say that there are two McLuhans. There's Marshall McLuhan, the literary scholar, literary critic, and then there's Marshall McLuhan, that people know for his studies of media, technology, culture. Really, there's only one McLuhan, and those two camps are really inseparable, because he arrived at the one through the other. And in fact, it's funny because the two camps are kind of opposed, the people who fall into one or the other more. The literary people like to concentrate more on that, and certainly that was his early career, but it was also his career all along. And the people who enjoy his work in media and technology, the medium is the message, understanding media, don't necessarily know what to make of the literature stuff and find it difficult and problematic, and would probably rather not have to confront it. But you do have to confront it if you want to understand where Marshall McLuhan came from with his studies in culture and technology. He got there directly through literature. So if you want to understand that, you can't ignore it. And if you want to follow that work, if you want to actually put any of it to use, which I think is really the point of it all, then you can't ignore it. And in fact, you're not going to get very far if you don't wrestle with it a bit. And that brings us back to Joyce, because no one is more widely quoted by Marshall McLuhan in his work than James Joyce. Not Ulysses, but more Finnegans Wake. And Ulysses is by way of being a bit of a dry run for Finnegans Wake. I came across this piece by Dad, Eric McLuhan, called Thoughts After McLuhan, and this was published 2011, the centenary of Marshall McLuhan's birth, when there was a lot of activity. I'm not sure, I haven't seen a copy of this on the shelf, but apparently it's from the International Journal of McLuhan Studies, Understanding Media Today, 2011, Matteo Castellardi and Emanuela Patti. And this is actually a great little essay by Dad. Brings up a lot of things, and I'd like to make it available. I'll try when I manage to get down to some work on the website, which I know nothing about. But I'll read you this paragraph here because it bears on today's subject. Some years earlier, we discovered, Eric and Marshall, that James Joyce had actually made 2 dry runs at a new technique that he exploited in the novel Ulysses. T.S. Eliot hailed it as being of monumental significance for poets and artists of his time and for many years thereafter. That was the mythic technique of maintaining continuous parallels between 2 situations, in the case of Ulysses between Homeric Troy and modern Dublin. Pardon me. What Joyce scholars do not know is that there were 2 earlier attempts. One is the book of short stories Dubliners, the other the play Exiles. The latter exploits parallels between the modern time and Euripides' play Medea. The former exploits parallels between each of the stories set in Dublin and Ovid's Metamorphoses, 15 books in Ovid's work and 15 short stories, one for one. Had we finished these studies, they would have revolutionized Joyce studies. They still can and might. Marshall did a fair bit of work on that, the Ovid and Joyce project, and Metamorphoses and Ulysses. And I've actually handed off that material to somebody else to work on, somebody who worked on it back in the day. And hopefully that will come about. Otherwise, if anybody's super interested in it, let me know, and we'll see what we can do. I certainly don't have the background to take on a work like that at this point. So there's that. Another piece I want to bring up is this monumental essay by Marshall McLuhan, which was printed in Thought, Fordham University Quarterly, volume 28, number 108, spring 1953, and that is James Joyce, Trivial and Quadrivial. This is a very deep and heavy essay. I've gone through it once or twice. I'll need to go through it many more times before I get anywhere with it. This is definitely for the literary minded of you who've studied literature. And I don't know if I can really read a lot of it to be of any use to us right now, except to draw your attention to it. Yeah, I'll leave it at that because if I start into it, we won't get anywhere. The third item I want to bring up is printed in the Antigonish Review, number 106, which was published in, pardon me, my copy of this is a little charred. My parents had a house fire in 1999, and as I'm doing this series, you'll notice here and there a book that's a little charred at the bottom, and that's because it came through this house fire. Summer 1996. This has a piece in it by Eric McLuhan, closing out the volume, called Joyce and McLuhan. And I'm going to read a little bit from this. Joyce and McLuhan. Marshall McLuhan was not at all reticent about the debt he owed to James Joyce, and frequently uttered and published such statements as this, quote, "Nobody could pretend serious interest in my work who is not completely familiar with all the works of James Joyce and the French symbolists." He intended such statements to be taken quite literally, and truly, a full appreciation of McLuhan's work is impossible without the sort of perceptual training that such familiarity instills. That's a very important point, and I'm going to repeat it. A full appreciation of McLuhan's work is impossible without the sort of perceptual training that such familiarity instills. Again, this comes back to the fact that Marshall McLuhan came to his work understanding culture and technology directly through his studies in English literature and in literary criticism. And it was the way his brain was trained from those studies that allowed him to approach looking at technology the way he did. So when he says that nobody could pretend serious interest in my work who's not completely familiar with all the works of James Joyce and the French symbolists, he's saying that nobody can follow my footsteps who doesn't have the kind of training that I do, perceptual training, so training your mind to be able to make the same kind of connections. That's a fairly major point, and it's something that media people, McLuhan people even, will argue about and say, well, it's not necessary to read Finnegans Wake to be able to study media. And fair enough, it's not. But if you want to take up McLuhan studies in any serious way, and I'm talking to myself here, quite literally, you have to grapple with that. So, which reminds me to get back to reading Finnegans Wake. The medium is a message. I'll read a bit more here. There you go. Needless to say, that is not an attractive proposition, particularly to those from fields other than literature who resent the imputation that the training afforded by their own studies is in any measure inadequate. Consequently, such statements have come to be regarded as nothing more than provocative hyperbole. McLuhan, however, like Joyce, demanded the highest scholarship and erudition of those who would take him seriously or who would attempt to share his vision. He once remarked to me, as I know he did to many others, that his work on media and culture was, in the main, applied Joyce. In that case, it might be fair to say that no one can claim a serious appreciation of Joyce's work without a complete familiarity with the full spectrum of McLuhan's work. That might be even harder to swallow. Joyce himself claimed to be the greatest engineer who ever lived, unquote. Unquestionably, he is the towering figure in 20th century language and letters. McLuhan occupies much the same position vis-a-vis the study of communication in this century, having done for that field what Joyce did for expression in prose. Yet he is the only scholar to maintain that he has taken up where Joyce left off and pressed on to explore new areas of experience and understanding. Neither McLuhan nor Joyce worked in isolation from the mainstream of our intellectual tradition. Rather, each was quite aware of that tradition in all of its complexity and quite conscious of his role in it. It has been quite fashionable in recent years to downplay or denigrate privately and publicly Marshall McLuhan's knowledge and use of Joyce's work and his insights, a trend that does no one credit. After Work in Progress and Finnegans Wake, Joyce himself was widely regarded as a lunatic. For those who don't know, Finnegans Wake, before it was published, was just called Work in Progress. But 20 or 30 years after Joyce's death, just when he was beginning to be regarded as academically safe, a good many of the literati would wince and gnash their teeth whenever McLuhan cited Joyce or used his work to illuminate or obscure a point about contemporary culture. It was as if they felt that some crass and unworthy popularizer were poaching on their private preserve. Even today one finds condescending slights. I hope that my own study in Joyce in Menipism, note University of Toronto Press, late 96 or early 1997, will in some measure illuminate a few of the many insights that McLuhan derived from Joyce and the Wake, and afford some glimmering of why he insisted that his work on technology and culture owed Joyce a great debt. And what he was referring to there was this book, The Roll of Thunder in Finnegans Wake by Eric McLuhan. Thank you. This is fantastic. Thank you, Kiva. The Roll of Thunder in Finnegans Wake is based on Eric McLuhan's doctoral dissertation, the Menipism Thunder in Finnegans Wake, or something like that. Anyway, I forget right off the Menippean Thunder in Finnegans Wake. That's what it is, which is an even bigger volume than this. And it's nicely inscribed to me, for Andrew from his proud pa, Eric. Shem was a sham and a low sham. Forge away, he says. And it's kind of funny. So in this, in 96, he's talking about this, which is coming up in publication. And there's a little bit of crossover between the two texts. I'll read just a little bit from here. It was, in fact, about 1966, 1966, a couple of years before the writing of War and Peace in the Global Village, when my father and I first tackled Joyce's 10 Thunders. For those who don't know, in Finnegans Wake there are 10 words which are 100 letters long, and one of them is 101 letters long. And those are known as thunders. And this book, The Roll of Thunder in Finnegans Wake, is a detailed, very, very detailed study of those 10 100-letter words. We had been reading The Wake on and off together for a year or two for sheer enjoyment and delight in playing with language and as a way to whet our wits. We had developed the habit of reading aloud together each day a page of The Wake. The page often extended to 3 or 4, and our beginning point was usually chosen at random. A page may not seem like a lot, but a page of The Wake is not like an ordinary page. It demands the closest attention, with all senses operating at once, or as many as one can muster. And with 2 minds alert for nuance and reference, even a few lines can occupy 5 or 10 minutes of very hard work, what with probing back and forth in the text and making links with other passages in the book and entering marginal references. The Wake is not, like a novel, to be read all at one go, but sampled and sipped and relished in bits and used. Of course, now and then we would stumble across a thunder and wonder what in blazes Joyce was doing there. Eventually we grew sufficiently curious about these odd words to compile a list of all 10. We spent several days reading the thunders and puzzling over them. Several years later, we used the basic identification of 3 pages in War and Peace in the Global Village, an inventory of some of the current spastic situations that could be eliminated by more feed forward. The introduction begins with this paean to Joyce's prescience and his omnipresence in the text. And it goes on and on and on. I have the image, and I've heard it recounted somewhere, of Marshall and Eric McLuhan, father and son, sitting down in lawn chairs on a summer's day reading Finnegans Wake to each other, and to me that sounds amazing. To others, possibly my wife, it's horrific, and not everybody's a fan, and that's fine. I wish I'd spent more time reading The Wake with my dad. We did take a crack at it a bit, but we fell out of it. I'll finish here. Whenever he made a discovery about technology and culture, he, Marshall, would open The Wake and read for a bit, and there, sure enough, he would find that Joyce had already been over the ground decades earlier. Joyce did it by following the lines of force in the language, reading and using what was registered there about the convolutions and disturbances of human experience and perception. Often, too, McLuhan would find a pregnant allusion or turn of phrase in The Wake that would trigger associations to some matter currently under discussion. He did not merely use Joyce to confirm an insight, but also used Joyce as the stimulus for fresh awareness of the present moment. In the same vein, Joyce recommended using Vico for all he was worth. Even today, Joyce gladly performs the same service for anyone willing to rise to his level of play. Some, including Joyce, would have it sink, not rise. He often avowed that his art did not set out to be highbrow. Shem, after all, was a sham and a low sham. It is a commonplace that all great art has the same invigorative and illuminative power. In particular, that power is a defining characteristic of low and motley Menippean satire. And thus begins Dad's book, The Roll of Thunder in Finnegans Wake. Thank you for joining me tonight and every week. Cheers. Happy Bloomsday. And we'll see you next week. Stay safe out there.